Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's IJB Audit meeting. I've got a statutory statement I need to read out before we start the meeting. So I would like to welcome members to the hybrid meeting of the AHSCP Integration Joint Board Audit Committee and remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. Some members have joined remotely, and could I remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking, and please raise your electronic hand should you wish to speak. Please do not speak during items unless I invite you to speak. For members present, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Thank you. Well, we'll move on to item 1 on the agenda. That's apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Chris Boyle and Hayley Mearns today. We have Catherine Lindsay, Peter Drury joining the meeting remotely, and all other members of the board are present in the chamber.
Thank you. Now, in terms of the Code of Conduct of members of devolved public bodies, are there any declarations of interest or statements of transparency? I don't see any indications, so we'll accept that. Item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting and including the action points. Item number 3A has been submitted for approval as a correct record of the meeting of the 26th of April. Now, everybody had a chance to read it, and if anybody has any questions about it, please raise your hand. If not, can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Meehan, thank you. And the action points, can we...
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so this is the action points captures a number of long-standing and historic actions, but also a series of actions from April. We've made pretty good progress, as you can see, with many of the actions from April. As is to be expected, given the time of year. We are gradually working through some of the more outstanding or long-standing actions, and we'll continue to report back to the board on those actions. So I'm happy to take any questions on any of the points detailed.
Thanks, Sandy. Just one question I've got is, a couple of items have got June 2023 as an amber date. Could you just maybe explain that, please?
Yeah, when we were writing the action points, we hadn't quite got all our... it's sometimes hard as you're trying to get all the papers submitted to have everything aligned perfectly. And there's one or two things where we thought we would have submitted or clarified or ratified for June and maybe haven't quite got there, so we mark these up as amber. What we will do is, obviously they've not gone green, so they will reappear, and we'll make sure that any that have got an amber on there, they'll certainly be listed again, and a full update will be given at the next meeting. But sometimes just because of the quantity of papers coming through for this meeting in particular, it's sometimes just a wee bit hard to get everything submitted perfectly consistently at the last minute.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Peter Drury's got his hands up.
Thank you. I have noticed that the flavour has got, or the colour has got much greener, which is good. But there's one red box at the bottom going back to April 19, and it makes me wonder if that's just in the too hard category and whether it's actually needed, because when I joined the committee, I was given a very helpful induction by Sandy, and I felt that was enough at the time.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, some of the things that are at the bottom are proving a little difficult to deal with. If I use the second bottom example as an example, that has, kind of following that through, that was an issue about the SIPR ethical framework. That has proved a wee bit difficult to kind of get to grips with as a concept. We spoke about it at a development session, and you're translating that from a concept that we spoke about to actually an action that we can do has proved quite difficult, also a bit time consuming. The one below, you're right, Peter, potentially it has been superseded, maybe other things have fallen in place. We have re-spoken about it in February 22 when we had another development session. I think I'd probably maybe be inclined to leave that to the October 23 development session. And if at that point we think, you know what, we're sufficiently on top of this, maybe we can remove it and just say that's dealt with. I think that's maybe what we can do. Because it was about where we were collectively feeling we were in terms of our knowledge and our training and things like that. So maybe that's something that we can, if we haven't solved it by the October 23 development session, we can stock take it there and then move on from that point. But your point is completely fair. Sometimes things they're sometimes hard to do and maybe will never happen. And you actually see that in some papers this afternoon. And other things we have done in a different way. And ultimately other things have fallen in place and we maybe need to reassess. So what we'll do is we'll take a note there to stock take that when we do our October 23 development session.
That's fine, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and no other questions. I'll just move on to item 4. And thanks for that explanation, Sandy. Item 4 is just a statement. Members are requested to note that the IJB and the IJB's internal auditors have agreed priorities for the 2023-24 internal audit plan. These will be to address annual lead auditor and governance functions and to progress 2 discretionary audits regarding clinical care and professional governance and lead partner services. Firm plans, including assignment planning and resourcing impacts, are currently being refined. A finalised plan will be submitted to the August 2023 Audit Committee meeting. Has anybody got any remarks to make about that? It's pretty straightforward. No. I thought you were saying something. I saw your finger moving up. Okay, so I'll move on to item 5, and that's the internal audit report, follow-up actions, submit report number 4323 by the Chief Finance Officer. Sandy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, this is one of our regular reports where we update regarding your outstanding internal audit actions from previous internal audit reports. I think, and I was saying to the Chair when we were reviewing some papers, I was slightly disappointed to see more actions hadn't gone green, because my sense is we are gradually making progress with our backlog of actions. We're gradually picking them off. That's maybe not been the case. We have only had a few weeks since the last... Sorry, that's maybe not been the case so much in the last few weeks, because we have only had 2 months since our last meeting, and we have been focusing on delivering our annual accounts. But yeah, we have got all the actions from previous meetings are set out here. I think it's important to note we have intimated at section 2.8 of this paper that for the primary care audit, we do plan to, because this is a shared audit, it's a regional audit as well as being a local Angus audit, it's a regional Tayside audit, in order to avoid duplication and to some extent confusing people who are the respondents on these actions, we are going to channel the follow-up actions through the NHS Tayside audit process. So that means we don't have repetition and duplication. The audit information will all be available for our board members through those papers, and there's a link attached in these papers here. So hopefully members will feel that that is reasonable way forward. As I say, the key thing is to avoid repetition and duplication and to some extent confusion. But otherwise, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions. But I hope most members will recognise most of the content that we're covering here.
I'm seeing nods and no hands, so I suggest we just move on to the next. Oh, sorry, Councillor Meehan's got one question here.
Thank you.
Or maybe one.
Question for Sandy. Section 2.4, actions rear AN0521, charging for services. It mentions that an action plan has now been developed and delivery of that plan will be progressed. Would it be possible to have sight of that?
Yes. Yes, Councillor Meehan, it would be possible to have sight of that. So we have, and this has been an audit that we've been working on for quite some time, We have got a new updated action plan or improvement plan that I think a lot of the period we've been responding to this audit has been in the kind of COVID and post-COVID environment. I think we're all feeling more confident in that group now that the actions that we've got kind of currently coming through and documented in the plan associated with that is more robustly deliverable for us now. So yes, we'll make a note to share a copy of that.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Councillor Meehan, for that question. No other hands in the air. I'll move on to. It's.
Colleagues online can't hear.
Sorry about that. My question refers to Appendix 1. And again, it's AN0521 charging for services. It's a general question on when something becomes red. This charging for services is amber, but it has been running, I think, for some time. And the one below AN0321 is red, but appears to me to be very similar. I'm wondering when something becomes red from amber. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. I think what we've tried to do here, we've on that one in terms of the improvement. Sorry, in that one in terms of the improvement plan, we have tried to reset the dates and give a sense of the progress that's been made. So we are moving on a bit more, I think, robustly with that one. To some extent, some of the colouring is judgmental until something's definitively complete. But we were trying to give a sense that things were progressing on the charging for services one. I think, yeah, it's maybe judgmental. I can check the relative positions of those two, George, and see where we are. But yeah, it is probably a bit judgmental. I'll go back and check the detail behind those.
I mean, I fully accept the judgmental parts.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a valid comment because a lot of us have been living with these items for some considerable time, and we've built up a kind of innate, inherent knowledge of it. But it's good to query these things now and again, because we need to check the logic of what we're doing. So thank you. Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile looking at these from time to time. So thank you. Have you got any further questions, Councillor Meehan? Right, thank you very much. We'll move on to item. Oh, my apologies. Right, I have been reminded about the protocol. So, going to the recommendations that we just note the report and the progress made to date in terms of delivering the planned responses. So is everybody happy to accept that recommendation? Yep, no violent protests, right, good. Okay. It's a bit like being an organist. You've got so many stops to pull and... Oh. Thank you. Yeah, maybe. Right, that's us back on an even keel. Right, item 6, everybody. Thank you for your patience. And item 6 is to submit report number 4423 by the Chief Internal Auditor. So, Tony, can I invite you to say some words to this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. It's mostly self-explanatory. One element I just want to touch on in the explanation. So we're cracking on with the plan. Not quite there, unfortunately. You've got the finance report. The workforce one was delayed what might be reasonably described as a series of unfortunate incidents with our staffing, including a heart operation, COVID, and a variety of other ailments, which just meant it didn't get done. And I'm spoken to the auditor that there's nothing coming out of it that's concerning us, so that didn't impact on my annual report. But it does mean the report wasn't finalised, and obviously it is an important report because workforce is clearly a massive issue for you and indeed all IJBs and your partner bodies. So that will be coming, but there's nothing to worry about from the fact that it hasn't arrived. The other thing is, and I want to just explain this, we have an information sharing protocol in which your reports are shared with partner body audit committees, and indeed their reports are shared with you, as this one has been. And you will get other reports. You'll get both the council and health board annual audit reports in particular at your next meeting. But this one is a no assurance report, which is pretty unusual. What I'd like to stress, though, is not for this committee to be getting into the detail and to be looking at the action plan. That's very properly for the council to sort out and their audit committee. The reason that report is here is for you to understand the implications for your control environment, particularly as you are considering the governance statement today. So that's why it's there. It's not here to be second guessed, because we can't have audit committees second guessing each other, but it is here for you to say, well, what do we think about that? How does that impact on a control environment? And interestingly, there was another report, as we highlighted, an annual report, which gave quite positive assurance from an external review. So it is like an unusual situation, but that's why these reports are here. Not for detailed discussion, but for understanding of the governance implications. Apart from that, I don't think there's much else to say. We've given an explanation as to where we are, what we're doing, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have. You can see some indicative work on a plan for next year, but as discussed, the detail will come because we're just working out how to resource it. Because we do obviously the work on the annual report plus committees, it's generally working in partnership with the council. It's helpful if they can do some of the operational audits. And if it doesn't quite work out that way, we need to have a discussion, and that's slightly complicated by the fact we also do Dundee, and it's the same chief internal auditor now for both Angus and Dundee. So we're just having some resourcing type discussions. And obviously, from my perspective, we've been able to handle it in a sense because I'm quite experienced with all the Tayside IJBs. My successor may not be, so I need to consider what is a pretty big span of operations, which is 4 health boards, 6 IJBs as chief or joint chief, plus another few that we provide audits for. So we're just trying to work out where we stand with that. And actually, we'd still intend to provide the chief internal audit service for Angus, but we do need to make sure that we're sharing the workload. So that's just the discussion that's happening and why you haven't got a more detailed plan. So happy to take any questions you may have, or indeed not. And if not, please approve the report.
Thanks, Tony, for that explanation, and thank you for the update on the workforce issues. And it's quite understandable, obviously, the implication that's had, and we hope that the persons concerned are on the road to recovery and everything will get back on an even keel again. So otherwise, apart from that, the report is impeccable as always. So I'd invite the floor to raise any questions in the usual manner. If nobody has any issues, so we need to, just in accordance with the recommendations, approve the report, note and approve the report. Are we okay to do that? Yes, thank you. Move on to item number 7, which is submit a report IJB 4523 on the governance actions plan by the Chief Finance Officer. Sandy?
Yeah, Thanks, Chair. So again, this is another of our regular reports about updating the committee about where we are with governance actions. Worth just referencing, cross-referencing. We do highlight some key governance actions in our regular finance report to the IJB. Many of you will be familiar with that. It appears as a separate appendix, but useful just to kind of cross-check that as we come to the end of the year. And obviously, some of the actions that we see in this report are the things that will then emerge in our annual governance statement, which we see further down the agenda. Two things I just want to highlight. In Appendix 1, we've got the second item on Appendix 1, which is shaded in green. That's on track. It's kind of almost done. It is essentially done, but we have just created and it's the last wording in the right-hand box. We have just kind of created a final check for ourselves to make sure this change that we're doing is working on a practical basis. And that's just something that, along with the likes of Gail, we've agreed we would do to make sure that the process that we put in place will all flow through and deliver what we are needing to happen on a practical basis. And the other point I want to make is in the narrative, and it's linked to Appendix 2. We've had an ongoing issue, and it's detailed under 3.2, about lead partner services and trying to improve the information sharing we have with our lead partner services. That's what the current name for services we used to call hosted services. And there's a two-way flow of information that we need to create, us sharing information with other IJBs in Tayside and then sharing information with us. Those arrangements aren't working perfectly in terms of the flow of information. And we've set that out in Appendix 2 to give the committee an update about where we currently are and the gaps that still need to be filled. So we've kind of given you a deeper update than what we normally capture in these papers. So we have set out the things that are kind of better functioning, and there are some arrangements in place regarding clinical care governance, but there are other areas where we are still looking to have the arrangements fall into place to give us this comprehensive flow of information and assurance back and forward between partners going both ways. We will continue to update this committee about where we are with this particular issue at the August meeting and the December meeting, and effectively until it's closed out to all our satisfactions. So I think, again, this is something that I feel, as we've kind of come out of COVID, we will be able to kind of dedicate more management time to this, and we should be able to get this working to everybody's satisfaction, and we'll see the updates of that come through this committee. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody got any questions about any of the items, or particularly the increased narrative in Appendix 2? No, I don't see any hands, so we'll move on to the recommendations, which there's only one, which is... Oh, we've had a late hand. Catherine.
I think there's quite a delay in the digital side of things.
Oh, thank you very much. Right, okay, thanks for that.
Not at all. I just wanted to make a comment in relation to page 27 around the hosting arrangements or lead partner arrangements, and just wanted to note that I was very pleased to see the progress that's been made in relation to the cross-sharing of the clinical care governance work, notwithstanding there's still further work needed in the round, but that was a particularly helpful thing to see. Thank you.
Thank you for that observation, and thank you for the technical tip about the delay. I'll bear that in mind in future. Can we move on to the recommendations? And there's only one, which is to note the report and progress made to date in terms of delivering the planned response. Right, thank you very much. Right, moving on to item number 8 in the agenda, which is submit report 4623 by the Chief Officer on risk management annual report for 2022-2023. Who is speaking to this one? Right, Gail, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report's self-explanatory. The purpose for everybody was to provide a summary, an annual summary on our risk management activity throughout 22 and up to now in 2023. I just wondered if anyone has any particular questions around any of the detail that we've highlighted in there. I think throughout the report we've identified what the current position is, and we've added additional narrative re the particular risks that are in red.
Thank you, Chief Officer. That was nice and short. I'd just like to make a comment about the risk report. It's the first time that I've really been aware of this thing set out in an annual way like this, and having been through all the recent training and development sessions, it now makes much more sense than previously. And I'm encouraged to see that we've got what appears to be a very good handle on the risk situation, risks, and measured it against the risk appetite that we developed earlier. The plans in place appear robust, appear under control, and the sort of foreseen planned risk scoring seems to be consistent with our risk appetite. So I'm very encouraged that we've got a good handle on the risk situation. I've got a question from Tony, which I'll just ask you to speak now, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point. I think ideally the risk management report should provide assurance to the audit committee on the adequacy and effectiveness of risk management arrangements, and I think this does. It just doesn't use the words. So to keep an old man happy, if perhaps future iterations could say it overtly, and perhaps Gail might just want to confirm that for the record for this meeting, because I mean there's nothing in our report, there's nothing in this report that would lead you to think anything other than that there are adequate and effective arrangements. But as auditors, we just like to hear the words. It's the way we are.
I know we're very modest. You're absolutely right, Tony. Thank you for that, and I'm happy to accept that recommendation and put that in.
Thank you. That was my humble opinion was a summary of what you said. Exactly right. We should formalise that, and we've just had that. But yes, so we're all in agreement that it's a good report, and we just need to make more of it, and we'll do that in future. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No, I don't see any hands, so we'll move to the... Oh, sorry, sorry, but I keep forgetting about this delay. So whose hands up?
I think sorry, my hand's up.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're in the right-hand column there. Right, okay. Elaine, please ask your question.
I'm probably an observation. I'm just echoing your comment about how good it is to see this that kind of year by year and the colours. It really helps. But I suppose there is also a risk about red risks where we've made no progress, and amber risks that continue that could deteriorate into red. Our hope is that they will all come through and become green and become archived off. But there's probably some thought there about some of the risks that remain red are big. Workforce, finance. We have primary care sustainability is in progress, which we suggest will be at least probably amber or maybe red. So I suppose there is probably some thought about the overall just to be aware and to keep noticing that some of our risks remain big, red and live. So I suppose it's very helpful to have it presented like this, but just perhaps that longitudinal there are many risks that we're not managing to close off, if that makes sense. It's just an observation, but I think the report is helpful and may actually push this to the front of our minds as we go forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Elaine. Yeah, it's your point is taken, but the fact is we are where we are, and this picture depicts exactly the situation as it is. We, as an audit committee, don't have the authority or the means or the resources to progress these reports. We've got the ability to encourage, but it's essentially an IJB and a management function. But I'm sure that the pressures and observations will be taking place as we speak. I don't know if you can say anything on the matter, Tony, just about what we can do as an audit committee to, as Elaine said, push this agenda along.
Well, I don't want to spoil the excitement of my annual report, which I'm sure you're all waiting for eagerly, but the blunt truth is some of those risks you are not going to get down, not in the immediate future. It's not an environment in which those risks can necessarily be managed down. It's an interesting point when it relates to the risk appetite point, which, you know, I can pick up now in a sense. You have an appetite that describes where you'd like to be. You have an environment in which you're not necessarily going to get there, and those things have to reconcile at some point. But, you know, and don't, it's not a personal claim on Angus IJB. All of our annual reports are saying no matter how good you are, the risk environment out there is extremely tough, tougher than I've known it in my lifetime, in terms of finance, workforce, operational pressures. And to be blunt about it, it's important that those questions are asked. I think it's a really important question to ask and to keep asking, but you have to accept the fact that some of those things, like primary care, there's been a lot of good work done. Sorry, I'm just distracted. My replacement has been appointed, apparently. So where was I? Yes, in terms of, you know, some of them like primary care, a lot of good work's being done. I see that coming down, hopefully. You know, it's not for lack of trying. Things like finance and workforce, there are pressures out there which are completely beyond you, and some of them are extremely volatile, the finance in particular. So some of those risks, and there's a phrase about tolerate, treat, transfer. Well, you can't transfer your risks. And some of them you may have to tolerate with an understanding of how you mitigate them, how you mitigate the impact, but not getting them down to what you'd be comfortable with anytime soon. And that's just the way life is at the moment. And that's kind of a theme of the annual report, that you have to recognise the environment you're in. And sometimes, to be honest, if you can't reduce the risks to the achievement of key objectives, you tailor your key objectives so they are achievable within acceptable risk tolerances. So there's kind of a dialogue between your risk management and your objectives, which means that, bluntly speaking, if finances and workforce and other pressures are such that a target's not necessarily achievable, you have to decide, do we still want to go for it, or do we have something that perhaps is less desirable but more achievable and something we know we can deliver? So it's something I will be picking up in the annual report, but I think it's vitally important that the audit committee of all committees keeps asking that question.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Elaine, for the question, and we'll all take your example. I think it's just a reflection, basically, of the uncertain world we live in anyway, but we still have to deal with it. It's on our table. So if there are no further observations or questions or comments, I'd like to move on to the recommendations of this report. And there are several. 5. 1, review and accept the strategic risk profile, risk rating matrix and strategic risk improvement action plan. Acknowledge progress made in relation to internal audit review of risk management. Accept the new and emerging strategic risks. The IJB Audit Committee members have attended risk appetite development sessions, and the risk appetite was agreed on the 26th of April 2023. And 5th, acknowledge that the work is progressing in relation to the application of the risk appetite. So can I ask that we can accept these as a block, or do you want to do them individually? No, block acceptance. Right, thank you very much, everybody. Moving on to item number 9 in the agenda, which is the directions update, report number 4723 by the Chief Officer. Is that you again, Gail? Thank you.
Yes, this report outlines the summary of the directions that we have issued from the IJB from 2022 to April 2023. And there is an appendix attached in Appendix 1 that actually confirms the status of the directions. What the report doesn't include is the actual operational detail that is supported around that, because that is facilitated through our usual operational normal management arrangements for our IJB and the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership. This is the first time we've presented a report such as this, so it's really seeking feedback from the committee. Is this acceptable? Do you like this report? Is there anything else you would prefer to see?
Thank you, Gail. Yes, I like the report, and I think it's a necessary report, and it's the first time we've seen it, and it does characterise all the directions that have gone out there. But there's a couple of things that maybe we need to, from my point of view, I would like to see a bit more of. Is all right, it just sets out the directions and where they've gone, but it's hard to, apart from the status, it's quite light on detail. But then you did mention that is hidden deeper down in the operational details. I'd just like to get a feeling of red, green, amber, I suppose I'm thinking of. That I feel these are just kind of, they've been put over somewhere to another organisation, but and I don't want it to feel that that's it, the job done. It'd be good to have a kind of a more ongoing feel for how these directions are progressing. Okay, there's a date. There's a date issued, a review date and a status, but it's light on detail, maybe a bit more. There's links to meetings, but I don't know how everybody else feels about that. But it's good to see directions in a list like this, so we know where we are. We can get our arms around the problem. So I'll move over. Tony's got his hand up at the moment.
Yes, apologies. I'm abusing my position in my last audit committee, I'm afraid, but just to hopefully a helpful suggestion. I mean, I totally accept the point that one of the difficulties in all governance is making sure that standing committees don't become operational. There's a whole slew of information on that. So it's a difficult challenge, I think, for Gail to present something that gives assurance without dragging this committee into areas that perhaps it shouldn't go. I just wonder if a kind of a middle ground might be in the risk section. Just beefing that up to say, basically, without going into details on progress, but there's nothing that would threaten the achievement of the IJB's objectives or that would impact on any of the IJB's strategic risks. And I'm sure the wording could be greatly improved from that, but something there that maybe just gives that assurance without providing screeds of unnecessary detail.
Tony, that's actually a really helpful point, because you're absolutely right. We didn't want to get into all the operational detail at this committee, but we will have another look at what you've said there around adding to that risk point. That makes perfect sense to me, so thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Tony, for that observation. Thank you, Gail, for the response. Yes, we are just learning on this one. It's our first dip of our toes in the water of directions, and yeah, it will improve. But at least we've got a manageable list, and we'll just refine that as time goes on. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? No, then I'd like to move on to the recommendations. Two of them review the details of the directions issued by Angus HSCP since April 2022, and request a further update be prepared by to the IJB Audit Committee in December of this year. I'll be happy to accept both those recommendations. Yes, thank you. Item number 10. Submit a report 4823 by the Chief Finance Officer, the 2022-23 Annual Internal Audit Report.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll introduce this, but also give Tony an opportunity to comment on it, because it's obviously an output of our internal auditors. A lot of work goes into this report, as many of you will be aware. You're on both parties, and it's resulted in the output that you can see. And it's one of the key documents that we use as we create our annual governance statement, which you see a wee bit later on the agenda, and ultimately feeds into our annual accounts. I think when I'm looking at the timeline that we're working to in terms of receiving this and then putting it to the committee, it's an obvious thing for us to do, to kind of highlight some of the recommendations to you, and I think that's important. But just for everybody's awareness, through our executive management team, we are planning to review these governance documents, and we're going to do that over the summer. So we're going to give ourselves a bit of a time to review the body of the report. So in terms of the recommendations that are specifically flowing out of that, we've taken all the feedback in terms of the recommendations from our auditors. We've spoken to our management team. We've collated a series of responses, which you can see towards the end of the report. And we've tried to make those responses things that we will be able to deliver, the things that are manageable, measurable, all those things that we would look for in a response, so that when we're feeding back to this committee, when we reach the particular timelines, hopefully we'll be able to confirm that we have managed to make progress on these. So while I'm happy to take questions towards the end, I think I'd just like to pass over to Tony and perhaps give Tony opportunity to just raise any issues he wishes to about the appendix. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. If you'll indulge me for a second, this is my last annual report. So what I'd like to do is not take you through the detail. I'm sure you've all read it. And some of the themes are similar to what we've had in the past, but maybe take a step back. And as I possibly said earlier, I've been doing a lot of audit committees. So I can't what I said where. I've been in the health service since 1990. I've been in NHS Scotland since 1996. And the environment out there is as tough, but actually genuinely tougher and more volatile than I can ever remember it. And it's extremely challenging, not just for you as an IJB, but for your partner bodies as well. And I produce a lot of reports. It's an interesting thing because you have, I think, 7 recommendations here, which is bizarre because that's more than some organisations which are actually good at positions yourselves. So I think there's sometimes you have more recommendations because there's kind of the more you do, the more gaps there are, as I'm sure Gail has pointed out in the past. But if we take a step back, you do have financial challenges. You do realise that your commissioning plan hasn't fully addressed those yet. And that's going to be a massive issue for you. Elsewhere, we've actually recommended entire cultural changes. I think that the financial situation you're in at the moment doesn't justify that. But you will have to have these pressures in mind at all times in your decision making, in the further development of the strategic commissioning plan. And something probably the most important thing from this, which is this idea that in terms of your governance structures, in terms of this committee and others, you need to make sure that the delivery of the commissioning plan, the delivery of all the associated plans, and particularly the delivery of transformation that goes with it, that will be absolutely fundamental, not just to successful achievement of the strategic plan, but to the sustainability of services. Pressures really are immense out there. And if you don't get that right, that is the thing that will damage your services, damage the people of Angus. So that's the biggest issue. And there's a lot of things around governance, and they're not for their own sake. They're about the fact that in a fast-moving, high-risk environment, it's tremendously important that your governance structures, your risk management, all the other things are able to identify and respond to a change in risks nimbly and well. So that's why those recommendations are there. So I'm an auditor and I get excited about that stuff. They're for a purpose. And we also talk about some of the implementation of previous recommendations. And we've talked in the past about reviewing those. And there was a comment earlier by one of the audit committee members about making sure that we decide. And that needs to be an ongoing process because as risks change, the importance of those outstanding recommendations will change. But some of those are important to making sure that you can identify threats early and deal with them well and early. So that's why this report's there. I don't propose to go through it in fantastic detail, as I said. The one I'd probably just touch on, because it looks kind of odd in that context, is a risk appetite one. And that, so you had a report about risk appetite, and it touches on the point that Elaine made about making sure we keep on top of these risks. The so what question becomes vital in that context, not just in terms of, and Elaine, Gal's report talked about, if a risk is above appetite, we're going to monitor it more effectively. But actually, it's more than that. In a time of limited resources, if one risk is above appetite and another one's below, there is very little point feeding resources into the risk that's below appetite when there's something that's well above what we are prepared to accept. So risk appetite shouldn't just be a theoretical thing that sits in a drawer and once in a year you get told in a risk management report. It needs to influence organisational focus, organisational attention and will, but also resources. So it sounds like a technical issue, but it's not, because otherwise, there's no point having a risk appetite unless you do something with it. And it's actually a means of directing your entire organisation in a time of scarce resources. So I'm emphasising that one just because I think otherwise it's the sort of thing that looks like a techie auditor recommendation, and it's not. The other one, of course, there's one about monitoring governance. The other ones, as I say, they're quite bitty. And I wouldn't want you to take from the fact there's 7 recommendations that actually that means things are bad, because they're not, because this is actually a better report than many of the others were. In fact, very much better than some of the others I'm issuing at the moment. So it is a positive report. But again, to go back to Elaine's point, that doesn't mean you're going to hit your risk targets, because they're not under control at the moment nationally. The financial situation is extremely difficult. We are warning some of our health board partners about the potential availability of brokerage nationally, and that would have an impact on you. So in a sense, for you as an IJB, you've always had the safety net, if you like, in the integration scheme of, if there's an overspend, you can go to the partners and they're required to, sure, Sandy wouldn't like the phrase bail you out, but it's a safety net. That safety net may not be there. You have to act as if you're on your own 2 feet, and there won't be a safety net because, and particularly in Downside, it's no secret what their 3-year financial plan says. And that's not pretty. And it's by no means certain that across the country, the Scottish Government, given its own financial difficulties, is going to be able to fund that level of overspend. So it is a challenging environment. It is difficult. You're in a good position. And I think that's the point I'd like to finish with. You've done an awful lot of good work, and that's the overall theme of this report. But that doesn't mean that you're safe, because the environment out there is, I'm afraid, extremely tough. So that's where I'd like to finish. I'm happy to take any questions you may have on the content of the report. But I'd just like to finish one by saying the things I need to say, which I nearly forgot in one of my last ever audit committees, which is, as chief internal auditor, I'm comfortable that, so I just need to scroll up. I do need to say these words, unfortunately. It's the only bit I do have to read out. I have concluded that reliance can be placed on the IJB's governance arrangements and systems of internal control for 22-23. I have no concerns around the consistency of the governance statement with information we have, the format and content of the governance statement, or indeed the disclosure of any relevant issues. And then just finally, I'd like to thank Sandy in particular. He talked about a lot of work in this annual report. A lot of that work does fall on him. And we've had a very good working relationship over the piece, and indeed with Gail. And it's been an education and an inspiration working with both of them. So I'd just like to finish there and open up to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much for that, and thanks for your kind words. And I was particularly interested in what you had to say about the risk appetite. Yes, I totally agree. Again, we're quite new to this. We've only developed it once. And yes, I'm sure that people are using it as a tool to inform their decision making and prioritisation. And if not, we should be doing that at all levels, including the audit committee. We should maybe articulate the risks, terms of the risk appetite. Somewhere in the words there should be reference to the risk appetite with every risk. And it brings me to the kind of thought that we should perhaps review the risk appetite from time to time. We've done it once, the situation changes, and I would imagine that we should look at it from time to time to see if it's still relevant and valid. But so I'll take, I don't know whether we should agree on how often we do that, if we've already done that, but something we can follow up later on. But thank you very much for your observations. They're very, very much valued. Has anybody got any? Oh, Catherine's got her hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I had a small question just from my own understanding, and then a couple of comments. So firstly, the question was just in relation to page 57. Where we're talking about adults with incapacity, and there's a reference to that had been completed and it conflicting with otherwise positive reporting on AWI, and I just wonder whether or not you can help me understand what the positive reporting reference was to.
I may be able to. The reason I'm retiring is my memory isn't what it was, but I'm doing my best. So yeah, we had there was the joint inspection of adult support and protection, which I think it's only used to be the Care Commission. I don't know if it's in truth, but Care Quality Commission. So it's slightly odd. And to be honest, it's not an area I've got a great deal of expertise in. So we just left that as a slight ambiguity, if you like. So the Care Quality Commission came in, reviewed the whole thing, didn't find any problems. And then the internal auditors came in and found some problems. I didn't have the knowledge to reconcile that, so we kind of left it lying there.
So perhaps I can offer some clarification then. So that's absolutely right. There was a joint inspection of adult protection across the wider partnership, so not the health and social care partnership, but the widest partnership around protecting people, which did not specifically look at the adults with incapacity legal responsibilities of the local authority delivered by the partnership, which is quite a distinct area of practice. So that I just wondered if those two things had perhaps been conflated, but they were. There's some overlap, but they are quite distinct pieces of practice. So that's helpful in terms of just the clarification. But the contextualisation and the comment I wanted to make was just in relation to the wording around the Adult Protection Committee and the Adult Protection Improvement Plan. And I note that on page 57, there's a really helpful kind of comment, and I totally agree that the IJB does need to consider how it's receiving its assurance in relation to adult protection activities. And we know from the kind of multi-agency inspection that there's a lot of assurance about that at the moment. But it was just to say there are two quite distinct things from my understanding of it. So the Adult Protection Committee is a multi-agency committee that's legally constituted, and that actually the IJB and its constituent partners are accountable to in terms of their delivery of adult protection services that are within their remit as part of the wider partnership endeavour to keep people safe in Angus. So I think the gap may be more around how visible the reporting of the operational adult protection business that's conducted by the partners in the Health and Social Care Partnership is at committee. And I'm wondering whether or not the reference and the plan set out on page 53 around the reporting through the Chair Assurance Report and minutes of the SPG is then to be informed by the Performance Steering Group is probably the route through which I would envisage that operational reporting about what it is that the health bits and the social work and social care bits do within the partnership to keep people safe through the adult protection mechanisms, and that the reporting and scrutiny goes through that route. Then that's supplemented by the partnership scrutiny and oversight delivered by the Adult Protection Committee. I just thought it might be quite helpful to explain the separation out of those things and how I see those different routes potentially working in these new page 53 arrangements, if that makes sense.
If I may, Chair, to explain, so there's one bit where we probably just misunderstood those two. So the two, the internal audit report and the TQC report, I think we assumed they were fishing in the same pool, and they may not have been, so fine. I'm quite happy to clarify that. On the other side, I mean, auditors aren't complicated people in truth. I mean, we have we're looking at the situation. So years ago, and Sandy may well remember, we did some integration assurance principles, and we just said, basically, no omissions. That's the most important thing. Everything's got to be covered. No unnecessary duplication. So applying that principle, if you've got a group of people sitting around a table, if you like, I'm sure this is a crude paraphrase, sitting in judgment on the overall system, it kind of makes sense for them to tell people what they've concluded and doing that in a way that gives assurance to the various parties. And that line didn't seem to be coming through. So you can have other means for that coming into the IJB, and they might be helpful in terms of the fact they'd be more current. But it does seem to make sense that if you've got a group of people doing a task, not duplicating that task and just finding a way for that group to then provide assurance. Now, I know they sit in a sense above the IJB and all the other bodies, but if they're doing the job, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for other people to then duplicate that if they've already done it. But that was simply the thinking there.
Catherine, is that a legacy hand or a continuing hand?
No, it's a new hand.
A new hand.
Just to say, I'm quite happy to have conversations off table to explore that. But I think, the role and the remit of the Adult Protection Committee is quite specific around overseeing the multi-agency assurance around the system as a whole. Every constituent individual agency then has a responsibility to ensure that it understands that it's meeting its own obligations to then feed that into that committee. So we're already doing that because we're feeding into the committee itself. So it's that loop before it goes to the Adult Protection Committee that I think the IJB would benefit from the sight of that assurance, the internal assurance around that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know, it seems like a matter that should be addressed in the integration scheme, I would think as well. Possibly, I don't know. Gail, have you got any issues on that? Questions on that?
I don't know specifically, Chair, about the integration scheme, but it is something that we can look at with our other two HSCPs in Tayside, because I wouldn't want to have 3 systems in there because each have their own Adult Support and Protection Committee at the moment. And we have been doing some work. We've had a recent development session with police and social work and other colleagues around what we can do. And I know my other 2 health and social care partnerships are doing similar, Tony. So as you said, we don't want to duplicate effort, but nonetheless, we need to find a way to be able to capture that, Chair. So it's ongoing work at the moment.
Thank you. I just threw that one in. I was floundering a bit. But Catherine, is that assurance from Gail of future work on this? Are you happy with that, content with that response? Or do you want anything else done?
So with my Chief Social Officer hat on, the IJB delivery mechanisms of the IJB have to ensure that they've got internal assurance around these functions. And that's separate to the committee.
Okay, so we can take that.
I'm happy to have that off-table discussion if that's needed.
Yeah,
I think we're perhaps talking at cross purposes now.
I think offline might be the solution for this issue. Thank you, but thanks for bringing it up. Has anyone else got any? Sandy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And Catherine, at the risk of further cross purposes, just reflecting on the comments you've made on the report, given that we are kind of, this is an output from our internal auditors, and you're reflecting on the conversation you've had with Tony, do you feel, in terms of us documenting something, that it would be helpful to document something around the exchange we've just had, or are you comfortable that the exchange we've just had, when we've minuted it, will be sufficient? So I'm just wondering if there's something you feel we'd like to, could we add it into as a note to another meeting, a future meeting, or something like that? So I say, this is obviously Tony's report to us, but it's something we could maybe have, if we were rewriting, for example, the covering report, which obviously we can't do, but we could do an update to a future meeting. So I'm just wondering if you feel we've covered this sufficiently, or you would like something documented in the future.
I think it's probably helpful to note in the minute of the meeting the discussion that's taken place and the advice about individual agencies' requirement have their own internal assurance mechanism and reporting and oversight arrangements around the adult protection elements of the responsibility. I'm happy to provide a bit of commentary around, and feedback around any wording of that, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
No, Catherine, that's fine, and we'll not do anything specifically different. We will just try and capture all that output into the minutes of the meeting. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Sandy. Right, we'll move on to, I don't see any other questions. Move on to the recommendations, this one. Reviews the report in context of evaluating the internal control environment for 2022-23 and considers the issues raised in the report, reviews and approves the management responses to the internal audit report recommendations documented within the report. Are we happy to accept those recommendations? Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 11, which is the next in the series of the annual governance or the annual report combination of reports. And this is the 2023 Angus Integration Joint Board Annual Governance Statement, which builds up on the previous report. So submit a report of 4923 by the Chief Finance Officer. Sandy?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks. Right, this is another of our governance documents leading on from the annual internal audit report. We're now sharing our annual governance statement, which will ultimately feature as part of our annual accounts. I'm hopeful that the covering report describes the background to this and the requirements that we're trying to fulfil. Also things like our plans to share this document and equally receive assurance back from partners that we're working with. To some extent, I would desperately hope there's no surprises really in here, because one of our functions throughout the year is to kind of discuss and highlight governance issues. And this report, to some extent, describes the governance landscape, but also highlights issues of merit, many of which, as I say, you really should be familiar with. And you can see that really in the body of the report, I hope. For example, on page 77, we're flagging up issues regarding mental health, which hopefully from reports we've seen through the IJB would be familiar to most of us. By the time we get to page 78, we're discussing the Adults with Incapacity Act that has been noted today, but has been noted also at meetings we had in April. Equally, on page 78, there were issues associated with income management, and earlier on today, Councillor Meekin was asking us about the same issue in terms of the charging recommendations that we've seen through previous reports. So there's a whole range of issues that we've hopefully been able to capture and discuss throughout the year. At the bottom of page 78, it talks about development ideas, development issues, things that we're still looking at. And there is movement on some of these, although it's hard to tell. I would highlight, just because it's relevant for me to do it, given we've got a meeting this afternoon, on page 79 in the table of development issues. The third one of those is described as reviewing corporate service arrangements. There is particular reflection on that issue in the IJB papers only this afternoon. So although we weren't able to capture it because we haven't got a definitive outcome of this afternoon, although we haven't been able to capture it here, that is something that is on the move and we'll hopefully have a position on soon. Equally, some issues towards the end of the table regarding information governance strategy. we are going to escalate through this committee if we haven't got movement otherwise, and we've got that as a recommendation of another meeting, of another paper today. So hopefully this paper feels like it's a good representation of our governance arrangements, a fair representation of those, but equally flags up the challenges that we're grappling with in terms of governance. Not so much in terms of things like financial sustainability, but in terms of governance and the areas that we can focus on. The end of the paper, the end of the governance statement, does kind of capture some of the feedback from the internal audit report that we've seen a few minutes ago. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on this or deal with any comments.
Thank you. I don't have any comments on it. Has anybody got any questions for Sandy? I don't see any hands. I'll wait for the delay. There's Elaine.
Thank you. I think it's just really to reflect that this does feel like progress, and I think it probably is acknowledging some of that work that has to be done in mental health and the financial challenges around it, but also things that seem the large hospitals set aside again. We were derailed hugely and working on this through COVID, and I think it's really good to see this coming back onto almost out of that too difficult box where we put it during COVID and actually going back to work on it again. So I think this is really positive, and I think also seeing here that recognition that an internal audit report about the Adults with Incapacity Act and then reporting to our governance structures, I think gives some assurance that we are actually going looking for things to improve and to work on and to scrutinise some of our business as usual. Is it actually the right thing to do? So I think just really to say that this is happening to see. It's a lot of work, but it's work that's absolutely crucial to do. So thank you for the report.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine, and thanks for just drawing out that point about COVID, because I do feel we have lived a lot of audit committees through this COVID period. We've probably had at least a dozen, maybe more, and regularly we've had to say we haven't made the progress that we would hope for. Now, two things combined: one, a series of very, very difficult issues. That's why they're still here, but also the distraction and the complications that fell out of the immediate, but also the not so much now, but the ongoing effects over a 3-year period of COVID. So it's absolutely had an effect on our ability to take forward governance improvements. But now, I do feel we're able to kind of come back to these issues, and I really hope we will start to see progress through this committee and other committees in terms of addressing some issues that we really do need to be able to come back to. So, thanks, Elaine, for just flagging that point up.
Thank you, Sandy. Catherine?
Thank you. So I would note my agreement with Elaine's comments there, but also to point out and to celebrate, because I think it is worthy of celebration, the significant improvements made in relation to adult protection that are reported here. If we think back to some of the issues and concerns that had been raised and the audit work that was undertaken and reported to the IJB itself and the improvement plan, we can see through the external assurance of the overarching multi-agency protecting people inspection that took place and was reported earlier this year, that the activity that's been needed to turn that around has been undertaken in spite of COVID. And that's because the Health and Social Care Partnership has prioritised keeping people safe and doing the necessary to make sure that we've got assurance those systems work. So I think that is really worthy of a particular note. Those things don't happen by accident. There was a huge amount of improvement activity and support activity and investment went into achieving that positive improvement. So I think it is worthy of note at this point in the reporting procedures. Thank you.
Thank you for that positive endorsement. Thanks, Catherine. Anybody else got any comments, questions? I'm not seeing any hands. So I'd like to move on to the recommendations, which there are 3 of them. It's recommended that the IJB Audit Committee considers and approves the IJB's 2020-23 Annual Governance Statement. 2, authorises the Chair of the IJB's Audit Committee to write to Angus Council, NHS Tayside, IJB and Perth and Kinross IJB, confirming the adequacy and effectiveness of the government's arrangements within Angus IJB for 2022 to 23, including sharing the latest version of the annual governance statement. And 3, requests that the Chief Finance Officer seek assurance from NHS Tayside, Angus Council, Dundee IJB and Perth and Kinross IJB prior to the next Angus IJB Audit Committee meeting regarding reliance being placed on the systems of control within these organisations in the context of the impact on Angus IJB. So are we happy to accept those as a block of recommendations? Thank you. That's accepted. We'll move on to item 12, and I think that's Sandy again, but I'll just read it out. It's submit report number 5023 by the Chief Finance Officer, which is the unaudited annual accounts. Sandy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So again, this does follow on from the last 2 items, with both of those feeding into this document. The cover paper describes what we're sharing in the appendix, our unaudited annual accounts, which will be shared with our external auditors. Mark's on the call today. We'll share them with Mark and his team by the end of this month. The cover report describes the contents of these accounts, which are and the regulations that we're following. I think it's probably important I just note my thanks to Jane Mogg, who's on the call today, who's contributed significantly, along with others, to the collation of the accounts. And I'll just make 1 or 2 further comments. This is a set of financial accounts, so some of the numbers in here are not quite the same as we see in our management accounting reports that we share with the IJB. The main difference is the fact that these financial accounts are heavily influenced by changes in reserves. And that's set out in this paper, particularly issues associated in terms of magnitude with COVID reserves, where this year, as we've said in reports that have gone to the IJB, a significant element of reserves have been transferred back to the Scottish Government. The management commentary, in terms of its narrative, covers a whole range of issues. It describes where we are with our strategic direction, particularly references the development of the new strategic commissioning plan. It talks about where we have been operationally, things that have been our core operational business this year. It talks about things like the risks that we've been facing. And it also references, gives a summary of the financial position. And including with that, we reference things like the forward look, the financial sustainability issue, but we also clearly try and describe the position during 22-23. And that includes the impact, as I said, of things like reserves, but also the effect of COVID and some of the other significant impacts on the financial position of the IJB. So we've tried to cover all of those in the management commentary. We've also got things like the governance statement will slot in here once it's finalised. We've got the remuneration report, covering all the requirements of a remuneration report, I hope. And then we've got the formal accounts towards the end. We have started to have discussions with our external auditors in terms of the audit process. I know Jane's met with Mark and Mark's colleagues to start to share information about this. We'll continue to do that during the audit period, which we hope will run during July and August. But we already know from Mark's previous conversations, although that's our plan, we might have to see some flexibility in that, depending on the types of issues raised. So it should feel like, in terms of the management commentary, a lot of the story that we're trying to tell is familiar to all of us as attendees of the IJB. The numbers, as I say, are affected significantly by the changes in reserves, which are a result of Scottish Government transactions and things that we flagged up through IJB reports. And otherwise, you're obviously happy to take questions, but we will be looking to submit this to our external auditors in its final version after we've done 1 or 2 final tweaks by the end of this month. Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sandy. Before I throw it open to questions, I'd just like to invite Mark to be. He's not had a chance to say anything. Have you got any comments, reflections you'd like to pass on to us regarding how you see things progressing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Not too much to add to what Sandy's already outlined. We have agreed that some of the performance information will come slightly later this year. That's not really an issue for us at this point in time. We're happy to receive that later, just due to timing of collation of that information, and also that information coming to committee itself. So we're happy to receive that slightly later. We can still go on with the job in the meantime in terms of the financial sections of the financial statements themselves. So yes, happy with the timings as we've said. But yeah, as Sandy mentioned, of course, there may be flexibilities required, given just what comes up during the audit, I suppose itself, in terms of technical issues and so on. But at this point in time, we're happy and on track to complete the audit by the end of August.
Well, thank you for that clarification and assurance, Mark. I'd like to throw up the questions if anybody's got any. Unaudited accounts, it's work in progress. There will be other iterations. Councillor Meehan.
Sorry, just for clarification, Sandy, on the tables, where it uses the green, amber, red, it has some purple boxes. What's a purple box? I don't see it in the key. Do you see what I mean? This is page 88, 89. I see a green arrow. No.
Online folks can't hear.
I think Catherine said something.
Yeah, sorry, colleagues. It was just to say that there was no sound coming over because I don't think there was a mic open. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Could you repeat? I will repeat that. Okay, what I said, Catherine, wasn't enormously helpful. But we're not entirely sure what the purple, you can click purple represents. We will come back to you. Hopefully, I should come back to you this afternoon before we start the IJB meeting. I think there should be a colour index that references this. I'm half thinking it's not been assessed or something like that. But let us come back to that, and we'll clarify it as soon as we can.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that's part of another report, so it's we'll get that sorted out. I did sort of omit to say thanks to Jane for all her hard work. She always attends the meetings, but we don't really have a lot of questions on this unless anybody wants to ask Jane some questions about the report. Put her on the spot? No? No. Okay, thank you. Without further ado, I will move on to the recommendations. It's recommended that the Audit Committee notes the background regarding compilation of this year's IJB unaudited accounts, reviews the unaudited accounts and confirms the submission of the unaudited annual accounts to the IJB's external auditors. Are we happy to approve those recommendations? Yes, thank you. Right, we'll move on to item 13, which is report number 5123 by the Chief Finance Officer, which is an update to the IJB Reserves Policy. Sandy?
All right, thanks, Chair. Hopefully, Audit Committee members will remember that at the April 23 IJB meeting, the IJB devolved authority to the Audit Committee to update the reserves policy and also the financial regulations of the IJB. I think that's helpful because it gives us a bit more time and space to reflect on any proposed changes. At our April meeting, we did do and consider do a review of the financial regulations, and we considered that, and that has subsequently all been signed off and approved. And today we've taken the opportunity to present an update of the IJB's reserves policy. To some extent, the paper on financial regulations and this paper are both part of us gradually refreshing our governance arrangements, much along the lines of what we've spoken about earlier on today, things that maybe hadn't been reviewed during COVID, that did need a review, we're gradually getting back to. So that's why we're seeing a reserves policy update. The policy update is different to any decisions being made about the commitment or the development of reserves themselves. That is still reserved to the IJB. The main types of updates that we're capturing here are set out in the current position under a series of 4 bullet points. We're updating references to external guidance, clarifying the expectations about the types of reserves the IJB would hold, also reflecting changes from the 2022 integration scheme, and reflecting a previous agreement by the IJB to increase our contingency reserve to 3% of turnover. That decision previously by the IJB to increase the contingency level was itself a function of our reflections on the level of risk and our exposure to risks in the current operating environment. And we've already discussed that those are probably higher than we have maybe ever seen. So they are all the factors that we built into this review. There's nothing I feel that is seismic in terms of the changes here. They are updates along the lines of the 4 bullet points that we've just discussed there. One version of the appendix is the track changes version. We've been made, and hopefully that feels consistent with the kind of updates that I've just described we were trying to do. And then the second version is the clean version that is proposed for going forward. So hopefully people will feel that this makes sense, but I'm of course happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that update, Sandy. Yes, I agree. It's nothing startling changes, but the necessary changes nevertheless, and it's a good thing to keep these documents current and up to date. Has anybody got any questions for Sandy on this particular update to this document? No, I don't see any hands. Thank you. I'll move on to the recommendations then. It's recommended that the Angus IJB Committee considers and approves the updated IJB reserves policy and notes that the reserves policy will be reviewed by December 2026, the next one. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. We'll move on to item 14 now, which is 223 by the Chief Finance Officer. It's an internal audit report into financial management and addresses the follow-up item AN05/23. Sandy?
Yep, thanks, Chair. I'll just briefly introduce this, but also give Tony an opportunity to comment on it as well. This is a report that was referenced in the internal audit plan update that Tony has provided earlier on today. So this is one of the 2 kind of discretionary audits that we have undertaken this year, the other one being workforce. I think when we were creating our audit plan for this particular year, we were reflecting on, we always reflect on the risks that the IJB is managing and facing. But we also have to reflect on when reports had last been updated, or when issues have been last been covered. And we knew that core financial management hadn't been subject to an internal audit for a number of years, and we felt this year was an appropriate year to go back to review that. So again, we've worked with our internal auditors, and this is the output of that process. We've tried again in terms of the management, the recommendations to us in terms of the management responses. We've tried to include management responses that will be deliverable and measurable, and we will be able to report back that we have been able to achieve those. So that has been one of the ways we've tried to make sure we're responding in a deliverable way. So I'm happy to take any questions, but before I do, I'd like to just pass over to Tony to see if Tony would like to make any comments on the report.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's a very positive report. I mean, you'll see no issues in terms of the financial processes and everything else, the recommendations are really about two things. One, kind of the sorts of improvements you always want to make, and perhaps standing outside. So, for example, the recommendation on the terminology, it's not a criticism of the reports themselves. It's just an acknowledgement that if you come from what might be called a normal environment, and people start talking about earmarks and all sorts of technical terms which come into these reports, just making sure that people understand, because it's important that every member, no matter what their background, understands the terminology used, and just asking them and making sure that everyone's up to understands what's going on. And that's particularly important as the financial environment gets more challenging, because everyone needs to be on board and fully understand the scale of the challenge and what you're doing about it, and indeed whether we're successful. The bits about linking to transformation, are pretty obvious in terms of what we said in the annual report, and they're almost contiguous with that. Obviously highlighting, as we did in the full report, we're not understanding quite yet how we're going to achieve financial balance. And I'll note the reserves policy that just went. So the intention is not only to achieve financial balance, but keep 3% reserves. So in terms of the financial risks you're facing, I absolutely understand that decision. In terms of the financial risks you're facing, that's going to be pretty challenging if you can have 3% reserves plus making sure you break even. So these are all things intended to help that. And really just improvements to reporting, because, and I'll emphasise it again, you've got an awful lot of financial challenges you need as a board. So as an audit committee and as a board, IJB board, you need to be fully conversant with those risks. You need to understand them, and they need to start factoring into all the decisions that the IJB makes, so that the more transparent and clear and overt financial reporting is, in a way that's understandable to everyone, including as well, of course, the public we serve, the better it will be. But there's no concerns. It's not about financial processes or anything else. Those are good. This is almost, if you like, the icing on the cake to make sure that at the final end. So it's almost like preparing a dish. We've prepared a good dish. All the ingredients are there. We just need to put it on a plate in a way that makes it look as appetizing as possible. Sorry, I just realised that's a completely weird metaphor, but I think in terms of the fact that what you've got, it's a very good groundwork there, and it's just about the final presentation.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for these observations. And yeah, I personally find these internal drill down reports, if I could call them that, very useful. And there's been a few of them in the past. This one's relatively less challenging than some of the previous ones. And it's very reassuring to see that we have got a very strong financial function and resource as a tool to deal with the challenges in finance that you mentioned earlier on, Tony. So it's good to have that another view on the robustness of our financial resource, which we inherently knew anyway, but it's good to have an internal audit to back that up. So has anybody got any questions for Tony or Sandy on this paper? I don't see anything. Don't see any hands. So I'd like to move on to the recommendations, please. And it's recommended that we, as an audit committee, note the findings of the output of the internal audit into financial management and request that the follow-up actions as described in the management response are monitored through the regular internal audit follow-up reports to the audit committee. So we're happy with those recommendations. Thank you very much. So, okay. So before we move on to item 15, which is the last item on our agenda, I just got some words to say. To the meeting, there are two people for whom this is their last Angus IJB audit meeting, and I'd like to recognise this from the chair. First of all, our internal auditor, Tony Gaskin, is retiring this summer. As well as leading the internal audit process team, Tony has attended all of our meetings, presented the reports, as you can see, and given us the benefits of his considerable experience in his own patient, conversational and considerate style. Looking beyond the audit results and relating them to potential threats and opportunities to the organisation, as we've seen so admirably demonstrated today. As a result of his team's input, I feel that the governance of our IJB is that much more robust. So I'd like to thank Tony on behalf of the Audit Committee for his contributions and wish him a very long, happy and fulfilling retirement. And secondly, as you may know, this is Karen Maley's last meeting supporting the Audit Committee, as she's leaving her current job to take up a new role in Angus Council. I would just like to thank Karen on behalf of us all for arranging and minuting these meetings. There's a lot of work that goes on in the background, which we don't necessarily see, but it makes these public meetings run as smoothly as possible. This was especially evident at the time of COVID, when we had to move to remote and then to hybrid ways of working. From a personal point of view, I'd like to thank Karen for all her support during my time as chair in the conduct of the meetings and in keeping me right on procedures and protocols. She's been my eyes and ears during these meetings, as you might have noticed. So I'm sure that everybody will want to join me in wishing Karen all the best for her future.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Appreciated.
Okay, so item 15 on the... Oh, sorry, Gail wants to say a couple of words.
Sorry, firstly, Tony, just on behalf of us all, I'd like to echo Andrew's points there. You've been immensely supportive as a colleague to me over the years when I probably didn't know enough about audit and risk, and then went on to do my masters around all of that work. But Tony, you've been a big part of that, and I want to thank you personally for all your support and help and putting up with my challenges when I challenge you as well. So I wish you all the best as well, Tony. And Karen knows my views, and thanks on her. I can't keep saying it enough, so thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, Gail, for these kind words. Okay, item 15 is the last item on the agenda, which is the date of the next meeting. The next meeting will be on Wednesday, the 23rd of August at 11:30 in the Town and County Hall, Forfar. So, thank you very much for attending, and hope to see some of you at the IJB meeting this afternoon. Thank you very much.
John, can you stop the live stream, please? Thank you.